Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I'm Russ Seiring, the City Planning Director, and first of all, I'd like to thank Mark Nixon for organizing this. The Michigan Municipal League is in town and having their conference downtown, which we're very excited about. And Joe, thank you for giving a free presentation for the public. I appreciate it very much. I have to my right Mark Nickita, and he's has a number. He's an architect. He's an urban designer. Got trained at University of Miami, one of the best design schools in the nation. And he's a former mayor of Birmingham, Michigan, and he's a city commissioner now at Birmingham. And more importantly, I'm a planner, that he's been a planning commissioner for many years. And he's been implementing a plan by Andres Dwani did a master plan for Birmingham, and he's been a key person of implementing that master plan for Birmingham. He's also a key person for the CNU, the Michigan Congress for New Urbanism chapter. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, Mark.
Joe has been very involved with, of course, CNU for a long time, and we've met a few times relative to our past CNUs and the activities that we do there. I think that it's very important as a civic elected official myself, and I'm sure many of you are, as I know, a number of people from the city here, and as I'm sure others. We recognize the importance of doing great buildings. I mean, showing all kinds of images of Detroit as an example, new development, adaptive reuse, infrastructure changes, non-motorized planning, all kinds of different things going on in cities. Those are the things that we see, and those are the things that we like to see in changing cities for the better. But on the other hand, we also have to recognize the details of actually having what are sound economic principles that support it. And as we all know, those of us who have been involved in this kind of thing, recognizing a car-oriented or suburban-type sprawl development versus urban and more compact development, recognizing the differences is a key component of that. And recognizing also the values from one to the other is significant. And what Joe has tapped into is, I think, something that's not only important in general, but is more acutely important in the last couple of years, as based on the Great Recession, cities all over have dealt with a real understanding, whether they liked it or not, of what tax base is all about, what development revenue is all about, and how your city has to really think differently, as we all do actually, in using our resources in a more effective way. Of course, as in my position in the city of Birmingham, we look very, very carefully at all of our money coming in and money going out, and I think are careful stewards of what we do. It's very difficult to do that in some cities based on the kinds of development that are there, and the kinds of development that you perpetuate or allow, and the kinds of development that your zoning and your guidelines dictate. So what Joe, I think, has done is a great job of helping to illuminate the different variations in that, and help us to understand how we can make better decisions to use our resources better in the future. And I think recognizing the problem is step one, maybe the most important step, before we can move forward and actually moving forward. So this goes beyond the aesthetic issue of, hey, I like buildings built to the street, or hey, I like mixed-use buildings, isn't that cool? Then someone else says, well, I like buildings set back, and I like buildings that have big parking lots because it's easy to get in and out. You know, that you can spend time all day long talking about whether that's good or bad, but ultimately it comes down to, in that regard, whether you like one color over another, and you're just arguing about something without substance. So in order to really talk about that argument with some level of depth, these kinds of numbers and this kind of discussion has to come to play. And I think Joe is leading the charge in bringing that to communities all over the country. So with that, we'll welcome Joe.
Thank you, Traverse City, for having me here. The presentation this morning was challenging the audience about how our cities get shaped, consciously or unconsciously, by policies and decisions that happen in either big ways or small ways, either directly and observable or through accretion over time. How do you explain this to people? I mean, we tend to deal with the side effects, the results of that, the physical stuff, but we don't necessarily take the policy on head on. So my challenge, I guess for me, to the audience is how do I articulate that to you all? First, I want to take a huge step back and explain why I got into this. I grew up in Rome, New York, which is over here. It's on the other end of the Rust Belt from Detroit, straight east, all tied together with this region. My town is, when I was a kid, who knows where Rome, New York is? Anyone? All right, that's pretty good. I don't get those kind of answers in the South, by the way. Rome destroyed itself, and this is actually from the Chamber of Commerce, this little ad right here. And I love this. If you're in Buffalo, why not drive 3 hours to Rome, right? There's nothing in Rome, so we have to try to pilfer off other people. Rome was actually the start point of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal started in Rome and it went east and west from there. So a lot of the manufacturing base that grew here, including Chicago, all happened because that Erie Canal all started in Rome. That's kind of the high point for Rome. It all went downhill from there. If y'all ever sang the Erie Canal song with the mule named Sal, they talk about Rome in that. So when I was a kid, this is Rome in its heyday. When I was a kid, Rome suffered a lot of the economic decline that a lot of the manufacturing base throughout the Northeast suffered. It was interesting that you had innovation for Detroit. You had urban renewal. I don't know if that's the kind of innovation that I could be happy about, but because we nailed it in Rome. We copied a lot of what everybody else did. Suffering those same problems in the 70s, we came up with this idea of just grasping at silver bullet projects. Do y'all know your Revolutionary War history? You remember the pivotal battle of Fort Stanwix? All right. Well, Fort Stanwix was the base at which my hometown was built on. And we had this little unfortunate coincidence, the fact that our entire downtown was built where the fort was. So they thought, hey, gee, let's just tear downtown down. So they took all of downtown and basically just wiped it all away, and we got this. So we have these Italian guys that dressed as revolutionaries, and they fight Italian guys that are dressed as redcoats, and it's like a big deal. We occasionally get a Canadian tourist, and that's about it. If that wasn't good enough, we used renewal to wipe out the rest of downtown. So we did what other people did. We did pedestrian mall because it's the 1970s. You need to have a pedestrian mall, right? Plaza. So if the 12-acre pedestrian mall wasn't big enough, let's go ahead and do another 6-acre plaza on it. A couple parking garages because, hey, you all are going to come visit Rome, New York now, right? New City Hall. And because this parking deck was a little bit too far away, literally 100 feet away, they went ahead and made a surface parking lot for those that couldn't walk that far. A mall, a new mall addition over here, and then this really crazy Le Corbusier meets the Ponte Vecchio, this massive concrete bridge that was called the Living Bridge. I'm not making that up. It had storefronts on it, and it just shot across. This was the first escalator in town. As kids, we used to ride the escalator back and forth, back and forth. We'd never go shopping, but it was kind of a fun thing to do. Of the 280 or 230 businesses that got checks to relocate out of this area and into the new mall and Living Bridge, of the 230 businesses, only 18 of them relocated. The other 200 some odd businesses took their checks and moved to Florida. So I thought this was normal. Surely this happened in your town, right? This is just a normal part of growing up. All of this stuff got wiped out. These are the only buildings that are left standing today. And this is my downtown. Isn't it awesome? This is my church, by the way. This is where I went to church. And I basically sat in there and just, every Sunday just stared at the ceiling and kind of fell in love with the building and wanted to be an architect. So, we had the lake effect snow where I grew up, and I was like, well, hey, there's an architecture school down here. I think I'm going to hit the beach. Unfortunately, I chose the wrong profession. In architecture school, you don't really get out of the building much. Liz Blader-Zyberk and Andreas Duani were two of my professors. At the time, this was an architecture school struggling with rapid urbanization of South Florida. So this was the 80s. They were designing Seaside at the time. A lot of those plans were coming through the architecture studios, and we were the guinea pigs to mess up their zoning codes. But they were obsessed about this. And this was new to me. I'd never seen growth before, but this is what they were up against. Is how do you handle this? How do you deal with this traffic? How do you deal with these inhospitable environments that we're making for people? How do we work with this cartoon called sprawl, right? It's actually a real place. This is San Antonio, Texas. And this is the obsession of where new urbanism kind of sprang from. For me, it was kind of a little bit weird. I was dealing with a town that was falling apart. I was looking for how did my town make those choices? As luck would have it, I went to did a semester abroad program in this Rome. This is Rome, Italy, a different Rome. This is where I lived. This is where I went to school, and this is where I ate. Oops. And so I really struggled with this really strange paradigm. How does one Rome stay alive and one Rome die? How did these choices happen? And how is, I mean, just basically I watched my town commit suicide as a kid. And the more I thought about it, the more I started realizing cities are all places in time. They start in a way, like Seaside's a baby, Rome, this Rome, is a great-great-grandfather. You know, the older the place, the more bumps and bruises. Detroit will see these kind of changes go through, and you didn't nearly do the destruction on yourself the way that my town did. So you can recover from urban renewal. My town can't. So when I talk about DNA, I talk about it no different than I talk about myself. So this is me when I was 3 months old and I had hair, right? That's me. And this is what I'm going to become. So in a way, I can't change my trajectory to being Papa. I'm going to be him whether I like it or not, or more importantly, I'm going to be this guy, again, when I had hair. But I'm genetically Italian. You can tell from my name and how much I move my hands around. So we like to eat a lot. I love pizza. Can't change that. But we also have a genetic predisposition to heart disease. So I know that I have to watch what I eat. And it's just something I have to do. This is how I have to live. You all do this, right? You understand your genetic issues in your family, and you cope with it. It's something that affects how you live. So for your communities, it's no different. What does Ashville, North Carolina, want to be when it grows up? What does Detroit want to be when it grows up? What does Traverse City want to be when it grows up? You're either growing or you're dying, and hopefully you grow in a way that's positive, right? So here's Asheville. Who's been to Asheville? Oh, cool. Yeah, Asheville's a neat little town. It's a quaint little town up in the western part of the state, up in the mountains. Beautiful scenery. This is shot off the Blue Ridge Parkway. Home of bluegrass music, beer. We've got lots of beer. We've got 20 breweries. It's about 5,000 people per brewery. But we drink a lot. And like any quaint little mountain town in the south, we've got men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. Really typical place. Asheville suffered a decline. I'll get into it more tomorrow morning at that presentation, but we suffered a decline, not unlike Rome, but we chose a different path, or they chose a different path, and actually had all of these buildings. Now the flip side was we had no faith in a downtown, so we had these ghosts staring us in the face. This wasn't too long ago for Asheville. That's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity right here in the picture. So I work with a real estate development company called Public Interest Projects, founded by this guy, Julian Price. It's a for-profit real estate development company. 75% of our money goes into the sticks and bricks, and we reserve 25% to seed businesses. So the first vegetarian restaurant, banks wouldn't fund. We put our money behind it. But it was all about cultivating, doing catalytic projects to cultivate a downtown. Our lessons were essentially looking at other cities around the country. So the bigger lesson was coming from Jane Jacobs. So you can't rely on bringing people downtown, you have to put them there. It was all about making housing units in the downtown. So this is one of our buildings, and this is how we dealt with it back in the day. We just covered it up with aluminum and just hope that it disappears. But we turned it into this. It was an old hotel from the 1920s. These are 400 to 600 square foot unit apartments. And then a bookstore. So who in this room would live in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? That's more than this morning. That's about 15%. Let me change the question. Who in this room has lived in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? That was our marketing survey. So rather than thinking about who we were and what we wanted, we thought about our community, that surely there's 26 people that are new to town, recently divorced, want to downsize, and this has been 100% occupied ever since. The more that you start thinking about the diversity of your community, the more you can help your community. So I'm going to give you a quick little test. And again, those of you that saw it this morning can't answer this. For the new people here, this is just a kid's puzzle. It's real simple. Just tell me how many shapes you see in this next image. I'm going to give you 5 seconds. And again, people who saw this morning can't yell it out. Ready? Go. All right, who's got the number? 10? 8? Anybody want to go higher than 10? 13. 19. Okay. How many kids were on the bus? What time was it on the clock? Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist, has a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's all about the way that our minds work, all around the questions that we ask. We can eliminate information. So think about being a caveman in the savannah looking for food. Spear, you're looking for antelopes and tigers. Food and danger. You can eliminate everything else. I eliminated information by the question I asked you. You didn't see that there were 5 kids on the bus. You didn't see that it was 10 after 10 because I didn't ask you that question. As your community decides things, my community decided to build the fort, they eliminated all sorts of other options that were on the table and went whole hog for this fort. They made the best decision they could at that time, and it was a very unfortunate choice. But I want you to think about it. We ask the right questions about what our cities are. Are we talking about our cities the right way? When we talk about complete streets, good urbanism, affordable housing, historic architecture, are we really framing the question the right way? So what we tend to do with our company is talk about what cities are, if you just look it up in Oxford American Dictionary, incorporate, to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. Now, Mark's architecture firm, my economics firm, is no different than a city. It's got a cash flow, it's incorporated, we have legal papers, there's owners, you all elect yours, I elect mine in my hometown. But my city is, this is Ashville, is a finite boundary of land that has to cash flow, it has to operate, much like our real estate development company. We're a $15 million development company of buildings inside a $12.8 billion corporation called Ashville. $12.8 billion. If you were to recreate Asheville, that's what it would take. That's about 4 times the Donald in value. So this guy runs around with meat on his stick talking about how great he is, right? And how much money he has. Well, we're 4 times more rich than he is. So why aren't we bragging about that? Why aren't we talking about that? So if you look at cities, if you look at what they are, the buildings inside the cities are your crops. These are what you cultivate and grow. This is one of our buildings before here. This is all boarded up. We rehabbed it into retail, office, residential. We took this building from $300,000. There's this guy in town that complained. He said that we were subsidized with the streetscape project right here. So the city gave us a garbage can, a bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree, and a wider sidewalk. Thank you, city, for the $28,000 worth of stuff here. Our subsidy. We took it from $300,000 to $11 million worth of value. So we now pay 3,500% more taxes. Do y'all follow me? Anybody in here have a savings account that grows by 3,500%? So our community now has 3,500% more wealth off of us. They can buy 3,500% more garbage cans. We don't care. I mean, did y'all get that? That's all through historic preservation. That's all by renovating a building. And people say to me, they're like, well, Joe, that's fine. That's $11 million. We've got this Walmart over here at $20 million, which is super impressive. Walmart pays $220,000 in property taxes. That's an enormous sum. All right. That's apples and oranges here. How do I make these apples to apples? This is Walmart. This is our building. This is my house. These are my dogs. My dogs think they're lions. They're a little weird. This freaks my neighbors out, by the way. So if you had a 1-acre cookie cutter that fell from space and hit my neighborhood, it grabbed 10 houses, each of us paying $2,000 or about $20,000 an acre in taxes. Y'all follow me there? So let's just do things on an acre. So you take that acre, fly it in space, divide Walmart's tax productivity by the 34 acres that they're sitting on, and they're producing about $6,500 an acre. Now if you had an acre of our building, this is what you get. So what gives you more wealth? You know, I was presenting this in California a couple weeks ago. I wanted to make it real simple for them. I was like, hey, y'all are in California. Don't want to make things too complicated. You have an acre of land to grow something in California. What are you going to grow? And they got the joke. Wheat, soybeans, or marijuana. What do you want? So, you know, in California, they're like, hey, Joe, we've got retail taxes. Incidentally, y'all don't use a whole lot of retail taxes in your state. So this, from here forward, you can stop. This is how you cultivate your wealth. But let's just go ahead and bring the retail into it. So this is the average sales. The city gets a portion of that, which is about this, which is more than the property taxes, or a total tax nut of $51,000 an acre. This is the total productivity per acre of that Walmart. This is just our property taxes to the city. You add our retail taxes, you're cooking with gas, jobs per acre. You know, just let the numbers do your work for you. They're right there. Heck, we even got residential per acre, and there it is, a big goose egg. So what we find with cities on Main Street, in any city, the evidence is there. You just have to find the math, right? So that's the city side. As you know, cities sit inside a county, and one of the things that pops up immediately is the average city resident produces more county taxes to the county per acre than somebody out in the county. So while those brothers and sisters out in the county want to hate on us and don't like our downtown development and whatever, well, they should be sending us a big thank you check because we send more money out to the county than they produce. This is how sprawl happens. We're covering their bills. You bring them all into it, you see why an elected official would go commercial versus residential in blue down here. Oh, incidentally, we like to pick on the Biltmore estate. They get a great tax break. America's largest house needs the biggest tax break. But so there's the mall. Now let's not stop there. Let's bring downtown into it. So here's our building downtown. Here's the mall at $8,000 an acre. So our building produces $250,000 an acre in county taxes. When's the last time the county came into downtown and did a dog park or a greenway or a bike rack? Never. So what's good for the downtown is great for the city, but it's unbelievable for the county because it's straight cash out to them. And again, y'all just need to articulate that and point it out and just say, let's work together because we're in this corporation together. I am a county shareholder too. So using efficiency, we're used to doing this. We do this with cars, right? We don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis, do we? Yeah, if we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. We know this is kind of silly because all tanks are different sizes. So rather than say miles per tank, we say miles per gallon because that's what efficiency is. And look at that, the numbers change. We should all be driving BMW Acetas at 70 miles per gallon. Sorry to the Prius owners in the audience. But do y'all get this? I mean, it's about gauging efficiency on consumption. Gasoline is what drives the vehicle. Land is what drives buildings. Land is what you can control. Land is your boundary. You can't make another county. Your county doesn't annex another county. That's it. That's all you have. So how you use that is really critical. We gauge per gallon off a $3 commodity. Shouldn't we be doing it off a $30,000 commodity? So this isn't scary math that I'm using here. This is just fifth grade division, taking the unit of building into the unit of land. Now we use technology. We can take the city and move the city aside and do things with GIS like pull out the streets and infrastructure to which the buildings are built and laying on top of. And then there's the typical stuff GIS gets used for, the ologies, the hydrology, geology, nature and the man-made. And what we like to do is split the gap between nature and the man-made and find out what policy is doing to drive the man-made decisions. Can I show you what's going on with an economic effect and how your land choices are being made, right? So like an economic MRI, we'll take, this is Ashville, this is my county. This is the way politicians typically look at my county. This is part of the national park system. This is Mount Mitchell. So we gray it out because it's not taxable. So it's producing nothing. There it is. We have low tax value to high tax value. So this is a super, super expensive parcel right here. This is $75 million in this purple splotch. Well, this is part of the Biltmore estate. These two parcels combined are 8,000 acres. It's incredibly large. Now, who in this room has 8,000 acres to kick around? No one. So how do I make this apples to apples to compare? So rather than a miles per tank or a total value, this is a total value. Let's go value per acre, and the map changes. And I'll just show it to you in 3D. Can y'all tell me where downtown Asheville might possibly be? Boom, right? So when we pay taxes, there's a millage rate. We're generally paying the same county millage rate across the whole, in my county, across the whole thing. So everybody in here is paying 6 mills per thousand. Imagine like 6 cents per $100 as a tax bill. And you just lay this on here like a bed sheet. You've got this huge spike right here. And then here's a little town. This is Black Mountain that's got a little 2-story Main Street, and it still pops up. So you got Mama Bear and Baby Bear over here. So the urban form will show you what's going on from a cash flow standpoint. Those buildings that we argue about, the nice Main Street buildings, they also make you more wealthy. It's right there. So you can be in a big city. This is Travis County or Austin. Can you tell me where downtown Austin is? Boom, right? Brevard, North Carolina. This is a town of about 6,000 people. Boom, here's Main Street. You know, the form is there. The information is there. We just have to articulate it. So we've done this all across the country. Doesn't matter what state you go to. It could be Driggs, Idaho, or Des Moines. For every dollar of county taxes somebody's paying to the county per acre, a city resident's about paying $5 to the county. The Walmart's about $6. The mall's about $9. As soon as you get to a two-story building, it jumps up. It's not a proportional jump. It's an exponential jump to a three-story building and a six-story building. The wealth is there in that traditional form on our main streets in every town. We're just letting it go. Or conversely, we're giving people subsidies to do this. Put simply, the tax system is based on value. So there's a perverse incentive for me to build cheap junk in your community. The cheaper the junk, the lower the taxes. Does that make sense? That's what's happening. So, okay, Joe, you don't understand. This is America. People want to spread out. You're just denying America what they want, their freedom, right? So what if I could bring you an entire county of freedom? What if I could bring you the ghost of Christmas future, that county that just went ahead and suburbanized the whole entire thing? Most cities have little pieces of suburbia. Gwinnett County, Georgia is an entire suburban county. When we were doing their analysis, this is, everybody ever hear of Lawrenceville, Georgia? Lawrenceville, Georgia is the county seat of Gwinnett County. Gwinnett County is out here. Here's Atlanta. They told me, and I'm not making this up, Joe, you're not allowed to use the word urban, city, town, or municipal in your presentation or your report. Those are offensive words to us. We're rural people in Gwinnett County. Rural people. This is the big city. This is the biggest town inside the county at 35,000 people. I just said town, sorry. When we did their numbers, there are 800,000 people in that county. 800,000. I was blown away. I was like, damn, that's a lot of people. So I called my client and I said to her, I said, Kelly, y'all are 800,000 people. And she goes, but honey, you need to realize we're 460 square miles. We're huge. All right. What's 800,000 people divided by 460? That's about 1,900 people per square mile. Do you follow me? So 1,900 people per square mile, which is less dense than DeKalb County. But we had all of this other data. It's kind of interesting that you showed some of this data because I was running the numbers while you were talking. We had all of this data too. They're actually 200 people per square mile denser than Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. Do y'all know what's in Mecklenburg, North Carolina? Charlotte. I was blown away. I was like, how the hell did you guys do this? You guys got denser than Mecklenburg and you didn't produce a Charlotte. Your biggest town is 35,000 people, which is the size of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That's what rural looks like. You guys are up here. This is Charlotte. That's Nashville. There's 600 people per square mile denser than Nashville. This is Austin. They're almost 1,000 people denser than Austin. Raleigh, Asheville, and Chapel Hill. These are choices they made. They told themselves we're not building a city, and they didn't. They didn't build wealth either. So here's what they got. This is their model, and when we produced it, I was like, what the hell is going on? You usually see something different than this. So we kind of turned it on its side, and it's like a big, thick 1970s shag carpet. It's like through the whole thing. This is what we typically see. This is Orange County, North Carolina. This is Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Hillsborough. And you can see Main Street, Main Street, Main Street pop up like Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. And this is New Urbanism over here. So you can see the reaction of that physical form producing more wealth back to the community right there. This is what you guys got. What the hell happened here? And so just to pull the numbers on it, the top value of Gwinnett County, the most that they've cultivated is about $8 million an acre. All of these places are less dense and they've produced more wealth. So yeah, you've denied yourself an urban form. You said you didn't want to do that, but you also denied yourself wealth. You've got this. Oops, sorry. This. So I said, you have all of this horizontal infrastructure. Are you going broke yet? And they're like, oh yeah, we're going broke. Well, how did that happen? So when you look at these other cities, this is Nashville, Austin, and Lawrenceville at the same scale, side by side by side, the same counties, scales. So we made an economic heart monitor to see how they're pulsing out. So they're like, all right, we've got 192 million an acre here, your pulse in Nashville. Austin, you're spiking at 476, and Lawrenceville, you're flatlining at 8 million an acre. Those are the realities of your choices. So how we talk about this. As a designer, I want to talk about design. As a designer, I want to talk about those well-designed places because those are the places that are bringing you the spike. But what I find with most communities, I just have to wake them up a little bit with data first. We are flying blind on how we're building cities. And we can talk about greenways all we want. We can talk about all this stuff. But if your city's broke, you're not going to build anything. But we don't know how we got broke. These are all behaviors that were found. There's no such thing as a free market in all of this. So our tax code essentially drives this. It wasn't written by Moses. It's not on the stone tablet. These are all policies that are accrued over time. Like I said earlier, put simply, the cheaper the building, the lower the taxes. The reason why Walmart looks the way that it does is because by design, they're making the cheapest building possible. Their buildings last 15 years. I have nothing against Walmart. I don't hate the player. I hate the game. This is the game that harms all of our cities. So to show you tax what it does to the physical form, this is in Normandy, you were taxed on your building footprint down here. So people started projecting out over the building footprint as a tax break, and then they changed the tax policy. In England, you were taxed, the more windows you had, the higher your tax rate, so people started boarding up their windows to avoid taxes. They threw out the tax policy. In France, you were taxed below your roof line. Ever hear the guy, Francois Mansart? Architect designed this thing called the mansard roof, which is this, which was a tax loophole. You could stick your stories up here, and when the tax assessor came out, you said, this is clearly the roof right here, right? The physical form will show you what's going on. We can see this as designers. We're just articulating the wrong point. It's a tax system that's driving the architectural form. It's all of our tax policy that's making this stuff doable. It's not that the market wants it. It's an incredible deal. I don't have to pay for the infrastructure. I can build a really cheap building, and you're not going to charge me for the infrastructure. That's awesome. So realize these market forces that are in hand are actually by design. It's not somebody telling me to do it. It's all of our policies. So just a show of hands, who's read your local tax policies in the audience? Got one hand back there. You know, this is a quote from Mark Twain: a person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read. It's not that I like reading books full of legal documents, right? I'm a designer. I like to look at pictures. But it's that stuff that's what's driving good design. It's what's driving what's happening. Ashville, my little town, is worth $12.8 billion. It's worth more than all of your professional sports teams combined. It's worth about 20 Tigers. You know, I can tell you Mr. Illich knows what Manuel Cabrera's towel bill is. I can tell you the cups in our nightclub cost 5 cents a pop. Can you tell me what it costs to maintain the street out in front of this building? You know, we should know this stuff. We should be conversant in this stuff because it will make us better equipped to argue for better urbanism and better design in our communities. It's out there, and it's our biggest challenge. It's those policies that hurt us. So I just want to challenge you to do the math. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Robert Folks. How often do you work for banks? The question is, CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, they're required to do a lot of what you're talking about that everybody should do, but do you help any banks do a good job with it?
I've never talked with banks about this, although I did talk with Fitch bond rating agency at the Government Finance Officers Conference, which is a spectacular conference. I recommend y'all try it out. It's really kind of racy. I'm kidding. It's about the squarest conference out there. But the bond rating people, I think they should be paying more attention to this. We're doing a project in Lafayette, Louisiana right now where they're essentially teetering on bankruptcy. Since 1949, they've increased their population by 3 times, yet they've increased their mileage of pipe by 10 times. They've increased their fire hydrants by 21 times. They've only increased their wealth by 2 times. So they've gotten richer, but they've doubled down on all of their infrastructure. It's kind of like if I got a promotion and I go out and build a 6,000 square foot addition on my house. It feels all right until I have to start maintaining it or fixing it. And that's what a lot of cities are going through. I think Detroit is a lesson here of where a lot of American cities are going. Unfortunately, the financial industry is so much slower to catch up to it. So I'd rather go to the bond raters before the banks. The bond raters will be on it first because they're at risk more for the debt service on cities.
My name is Nate Griswold. Curious about green infrastructure in here, I do vegetative rooftops and other types of forms of green infrastructure, and how that ties into this urban redevelopment, because, all of that, the old cities are built on old infrastructure, and how you might, how that influences what you're doing, if you ever, because I know a lot of these cities I've worked in, and they have incentives that are out there trying to minimize the runoff from the stormwater and other things that hit that city. And Atlanta, I know for the urban heat island there creates more rain and more rain events, and actually typically is moving east. And Gwinnett County is one of the counties that's getting affected, by that, from studies that I've read.
That's probably a more sophisticated question than. I really should take you to Gwinnett County.
Oh, I've been there. I've done a lot of work.
When I presented that information, you'd think that would wake them up. And we had a private meeting the night before my actual presentation, and what they were doing is they were screening me. And after I showed that presentation, rather than say, oh, well, that's real interesting, they argued with me. They were just like, no, but we're not urban. We're not urban. And I said, no, I didn't call you urban, I called you dense. And it was mind-blowing to me. I was like, really, seriously? Like, you are seriously in some bad shape, and you're going to argue with me. I'm just giving you your balance sheet. To get into green infrastructure, they're in la-la land.
As you look at a place like Detroit or here like Traverse City, the cost of the development you're suggesting is enough that it often takes outside money, often outside developers. How do we get away from the demonization of the developer? It's something that we find here a lot, where someone comes in with a great idea, but those incentives and or the ability to make money on a certain piece of property creates a movement in the community to demonize the developer. How do we get around that?
I think that's it's a development illiteracy that goes through a lot of different strains. It happens inside planning departments. I have to raise capital, put a deal together, hire staff, hire an architect, go after land, work with a crazy landowner to get a right price. Then I go to the city, and I've got a staff that has never done development before, and they're judging my project. Think of it like figure skating. Would you trust a figure skating judge that's never laced up a pair of skates? No. But then in my community, even in Ashville, so I would argue that I think planning staffs have to work in the private sector more, and conversely, I also think that folks in the private sector should work in government, because there's no conspiracy inside government. It's just they're good people trying to get things done. And I've also seen developers, my peers, slam government, and that's not fair. So I think there needs to be more cross-training inside the actual implementation of getting things done. As far as the community, I don't know what the hell has happened in the last 20 years. I've got friends in town in Asheville. Seriously, come to Asheville. Developers are evil. Evil, evil, evil people. I've got a cartoon of us in our own newspaper that we created as some fat cat developers with a politician on a string. I got in an argument with one of my good friends, and I mentioned it at a beer party. I was like, yeah, I work in real estate development. And they're like, scumbag. And I'm like, really? Do you live in a bush? Like, somebody built your house, right? Or did you build your own? Did you get out there and follow a tree yourself and hand hewn it into your own tree, your own house? It's amazing how illiterate our communities have gotten. And we let it go in the public sphere.
Hi, my name's Jenna. I can be considered part of the new urban. I grew up in rural Northwest Ohio, but I just bought my first house in Central Neighborhood. I'm curious to know how ecological integrity is valued and green space is valued in the context of urban wealth.
I get that question a lot about, well, Joe, if we just follow your model, we'll just develop everything. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, a lot of our work actually stems from Ian McHarg's book, Design with Nature. I don't know if you ever read that book. It's an awesome book. It's written in 1969, Design with Nature. And he basically envisioned GIS technology. He gets kind of out there. You have to put it in the context of where he was in 1969 with like the Cuyahoga River was on fire and just, yeah, you'll love it. He's also Scottish, so he just absolutely tears apart the culture of our country, which is kind of fun. But he's like, you shall build layers. You shall understand where the wetlands are. These are where, he's Scottish, so he's like, these are where the water is. This is where you drink. You shall not build in your wetland. There should be a layer there. And then you should have a layer of where your cherished trees are. And you shall put those layers together, and the earth will tell you, like a piece of stained glass, where to look through. And it's true, good urban form is inherently environmental because you're not building in those sacred places. You should have those places off your map. Additional places to bring nature inward into the city. John Nolan wrote a paper in 1913 in Landscape Architect magazine arguing for Cambridge, Massachusetts to build parks throughout its city. And he made a tax argument to put those parks there. Because everybody in Somerville, Massachusetts was like, no, that's tax base. We don't want to get rid of our tax base. And what Nolan said is if you have a park here, it's kind of like if you have a beach, and then you have everyone here has access to the beach. Everybody's value that has access is more value than if you were Florida and you walled that beach off with a series of condos, right? So you can actually design it. We see that if you actually get into the model and you hover into the model and look into it, you'll see value spikes around those squares and plazas where there's prime real estate, and also it's a really nice place.
My name's John. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. Our little Melbourne, about 3 million people, has been voted the most livable town in the world for the last 5 years, I think. I wonder what value you put on being a livable city as against the almighty dollar of development. And I appreciate your answers last thing. We're actually looking or been invited back to Detroit because we do a lot of new development in new building materials. But I'd like your answer regarding livability. Big difference between livability and cost, sir. Thank you.
Well, we've done some work up in Canada, not Australians, but they're still part of the Commonwealth, and actually follow similar policies. Both of you all have growth boundaries. In Melbourne has a growth boundary. Most American cities, but for Oregon and Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where you find urban growth boundaries, where we say inside our counties, you can't grow past the city limits. It's incredibly rare. But in the Commonwealth countries, they do that. So what you find is that urban form is contained, and the value is actually higher in those places. So in addition to getting livability, you're also getting incredibly potent real estate. So that real estate with less infrastructure, because you don't have as many roads and junk that we have to service, your dollars go further. So what we find in Canada, actually Mark and I were talking about this in our last telephone call, the Canadian cities, they can service all sorts of human services in addition to physical infrastructure like streets and parks and schools. So their schools are better funded. They have social services that we don't give ourselves in our country. Depression training, job counseling, LGBT clinics, all of those are city services. Their property taxes are the same that we pay in America. So it's kind of fascinating. It's like, well, we basically, in our country, we put our money into asphalt. In your country, you put your money into people in the quality of life services that we don't in our country. And water too, yeah.
Are there any mayors that you've run into, or legislators, or are there any kind of emerging policy fixes or legislative fixes to some of this that you've seen?
Well, one of the things, yeah, we have a mayor right here.
believe in all that.
Yeah. You know, it's one of the things that we see is there's a lot of things that we just don't have we're not legislatively enabled to do. Like in Australia, you have a higher land value tax than what we have. So our land value tax is minuscule. We put all of our tax on the building improvement. So the junkier the building, the lower our tax that we put on it. So where in Australia, they changed that. In Canada, it's crazy how complex their tax system is. And once you sit down and read it, it's actually not that crazy at all. It's actually designed the way that cities are used. But Vermont just got enabled land value taxation. Pennsylvania's always had it. I talked to some of your folks from your legislative committee this morning for Michigan, because you all don't have it enabled here, and that could be. It's just illuminating getting what Mark talks about, getting informed about these other places and the tools that they have, and just giving us the ability to have the tools legislatively. At a local level, there's a lot of mayors out there that get it, but if they're not operating in a strong mayor form, like Mayor Joey Durrell in Lafayette, that guy's awesome, but he's a strong mayor, so he's just going whole hog into this and forcing his community to make these decisions, or at least be aware of the information. But where you have a strong city manager and more diverse council, you need to have 4 people with you, and that's the hard part. But Mark can probably address that better than I can.
I think I stated earlier the importance of getting people on the same page and recognizing the kinds of things that we're talking about. I find that you get a lot of buy-in to any kind of policy when it affects your pocketbook. I mean, I think when it comes down to money, when it comes down to budget, everybody sort of starts talking on the same page, because it comes down to we don't have the money, we don't have it in the budget, we can't get it done. And that goes back to my point that I made a bit earlier when I was presenting a couple of points that I think in lead up to Joe's presentation, is that the idea that it's very difficult to argue about something you like, or if you think sustainable ideas are really cool, and please come along with me on the really cool idea of green roofs or whatever it is that's part of the sustainable urban design ideas. I think those are great things to advocate for, and I think that there are many good urban smart growth policies, CNU Congress policies, the things that we all advocate, form-based code and certain densities and mixed use and complete streets. All these things are really good things, but really to get buy-in across the board, when you start talking about the budgetary impact and how these kinds of policies can become valuable when it comes to taxes, when it comes to revenues, when it becomes something that comes out of your pocket, and the wastefulness that can go in certain areas and the efficiencies that can go in others, then you get a whole lot of people listening. And I think that goes to the key point that Joe's advocating for, is this recognition that our tax policies have an impact on our ability to do things. And what's the number one thing that we're all talking about in Michigan right now? Roads, right? It's the big thing everybody's talking about. How are we paying for roads? Just had a conversation this morning about cutbacks in Lansing in certain departments so that we could pay for roads. I mean, that's a perfect example. That's going to affect all of us in the state, and we all would want better streets and roads to drive on. But do we want to give up a department or something else to do it? Well, obviously, it's all about numbers. And if we can argue for good growth policies that actually are economically driven, you get a whole lot more buy-in across the board, from municipal leaders on to stakeholders, on to residents and voters.
There's a lot of pride and passion here. I hope you've enjoyed our downtown, and hope you've been able to visit the Grand Traverse Commons, and maybe you brought your swim trunks and jumped in the bay. But what do you see up here? How are we doing from your perspective?
Are you talking to me?
Both of you guys.
I definitely have something that sticks out. But
Yeah, well, I mean, I got in last night at 10 o'clock, had a couple beers with somebody. Mr. Howe, is he here? There he is, yeah. I had a couple beers with him. It was fun. We had a great conversation. Local beers, I hope. Local beers, yep. I actually got lost walking around and saw some cool buildings. Saw some great motorcycles in the lobby of somebody's business, which I got stuck at.
It wasn't obviously too many because he remembers your name.
Yeah.
So.
But then, today I got a haircut at a local establishment, Robertson's Haircut. I gave a presentation. I didn't see much. I had fishing at the what's the name of the fish place across the street from the Scallywags. That was cool. I see all of it. You have a healthy Main Street. You have a diverse set of shops. There's some chains kind of snuck in there. But it's a fairly intact and fairly productive town for a city your size. You have a lot of great things going on. You have housing. Mr. Howe and I talked about it last night. It's good to see infill. Now, could the designs be better on some of them? Certainly. But you're light years ahead of where I was yesterday. I was in Brainerd, Minnesota. God, I wanted to kill myself. I don't know how Chuck does it. Y'all know Chuck Marone. One of the city council people told me on my way into the lecture yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago, I can't remember, but she'd been on city council for close to 20 years, and she said to me, before I got on stage, I don't know why people talk about 20-year-olds. They just complain too much. We don't need 20-year-olds. And I was like, all right, this is going to be a fun conversation. I did a 40-minute presentation, showed cities all across the country, explained how they worked, explained her problem. After the presentation, she came up to me. She goes, you don't understand anything about taxes. And I said, I'm sorry. I only speak at the assessors conference every year, and I've only been doing this for a decade, and this is my job. She goes, yeah, but I'm older than you. I hope that you don't have a politician like this, but she's in the majority in Brainerd. So, it's easy for me to see the great things in your community and kind of gloss over the bad stuff. There's actually a poster I have hanging above my desk. It's a Polish proverb. It says, not my circus, not my monkeys. I've got my own monkeys back in Ashville. I can tell you some horror stories of some crap that goes on there. But when I go away and come back, I'm like, yeah, this is actually a cool town. But if I'm there long enough, I get dragged into all the usual conversations, all the arguments, and all that stuff. So every city's got its bumps and bruises. And just a quick step back here. I consider this audience the enlightened crowd. You all get it. You're on fire about this stuff. You're passionate about this. I typically see that with the CNU crowd. These are the people that are just like, oh my God, what's going on out there? And kind of wake up. When it happened to me when I was in college, the most important picture in my presentation is my mom. I'd come home every break and just harass my poor mother about the design of communities because I was on fire. I was like, can you believe it? And I would get in a car with her and drive my poor mother through suburbia and just drive her around and we'd look at houses, and I'm like, why do you like this house, Mom? And she's like, well, I don't know. I like the door. The door's real nice. And I'm like, why do you do that? And I was my poor mother, and she's like, what do you want for dinner? Like, I just wasn't reaching her, and it's not that she's stupid, and that's just not on her radar screen. But as soon as you start talking about money, my mom's all over it. She gets it. She understands kitchen table economics, and that's all that this is. So again, I've kind of mutated into this financial guy talking about design that way, but I find that it works. I agree with Mark. This is how you reach people. But what's your opinion of Traverse City?
Well, I won't go into the subtleties because
I think it's cool, by the way.
I've been coming up here, of course, as being a Detroiter. I come up here, and my wife's family's had a place since the 50s in Lake Bel Air, so I've been coming up this way for a long, long time, and another family member on Torch Lake. So I know this area well enough to see the transition over the years. And I'd have to say, I haven't been here in maybe 2 years, I think. And I definitely recognize the change. And I think that there are a lot of very, very good changes, particularly the infill development and the adaptive reuse activity. This building, for example, the building just behind us here, the market, something or other, the old gray sort of, the gray painted building. I think those kinds of adaptive reuse changes are really great, unique, character building elements. Because those, specifically adaptive reuse buildings are great because they're rooted in the history of the city, and now they're changing for a new use, and they tie together the past and the present, and they're distinct to the place. When you build a new infill building, it's of course new, and oftentimes, depending on the quality and the way that it's designed, they can tend to be generic, and you'd see something here as you would in many other cities. So I don't think you get that sort of character, the root of the city as well with most infill buildings. But the adaptive reuse aspect, I think, is really a great place to be, and I think you're clearly seeing a lot of that in the city, much more than I've seen in the past. And some really cool things, like we ate last night, or we went to the Little Fleet event place over there, the outdoor, the food truck bar conglomeration. Unique things like that are really excellent. But I would have one very primary criticism that I think is not only notable, I think all of you know what I'm going to say. Well, when I say it, you'll probably
Can I take
know
a
it,
guess?
but-
I've been here 6 hours. Can I take a
but-
guess?
But
I was
it's
gonna say the
it's like a
Parkway.
major flag, the Parkway?
Yeah.
That wasn't it, that was actually second. But the number one is, and you guys got to work on this, is you got to turn that one-way Front Street into two ways. Number one problem in this town. Number one problem, in my opinion, that is got to go. I mean, that is fundamental to changing the core of the downtown. In my opinion,
I would
that has
agree.
got to go. It's unbelievable to me how much it could be better, because I see what it could be. And I'm telling you, that is a big one. That's worth putting some effort into. And I think you'll have a dramatically better town if you do that. And the Parkway is second. I think there are clearly improvements that could go there. I think there's some good things on the waterfront, but it's the disconnect
Yeah,
between
it's
the
totally walled
waterfront
off.
and the city that's problematic.
So, Mr. Howe here. I was given the mic because I had a question, then I forgot it. So I'm struggling. I guess I would throw out with the one-way on Front Street. I think State Street's our biggest concern because it's so underdeveloped. Let's start there and maybe just turn Front Street to one lane, and then have a really nice
Well,
pedestrian way.
they
with
work
it.
hand in hand, so you do both of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, I don't mean just Front Street. I mean both of them.
Yeah,
The eastbound or the westbound and the eastbound. They both have to change.
And I
We're
guess
doing this all over the country. Everybody's doing this. This is very commonplace now, and I think Traverse City's it's about time, way over time.
Well, I think it's a trade-off. If you can either see yourself as a kidney or a heart. You know, do you want to pass traffic through? Is that your number one priority? Then that's what one-ways do. They're designed to funnel through. And so what's the trade-off? You're going to be either inconvenienced, or in some cities what you do is you just find your way around by making a right to go left.
Right.
And you go 2 or 3 minutes out of your way by a car, but you have so much more of a rich pedestrian environment. You have a richer pedestrian environment, you get more value out of your city from a tax base, also productivity. So to some extent you sacrifice productivity with a one-way pair system. And it's just a trade-off. But be conscious of it, put it down on paper. Yet you're right, you will have some traffic issues, but you can solve that with a 3-lane street instead of a 4-lane street. You know, where you have a center turn lane for the lefts, and that solves.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing, is like, just what are the options, what are your trade-offs? But I'll do all the trade-offs, because just by having a traffic flow, you're trading off on your economic ability of your buildings.
You
So-
actually do have enough room. If you design the intersections properly, you can work that out. I could just to give you an example, and there's countless examples, but because I'm commissioner in the city of Birmingham, if anybody's been to Birmingham, Maple Road is 15 mile, and in Metro Detroit, all the mile roads are big roads, right? They're big streets that cut through from the city. And the city's 5-6 million people. The region is quite large. Birmingham is surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people within just a couple miles, significantly bigger than what we have here. Our downtown, Maple Road, goes right through the center of downtown. And there's buildings on both sides that are built right to the street consistently for 5 blocks, what have you, or long or bigger. We have two-way traffic parking on each side of the street. It's no different than Front Street if you just flipped it. And I can tell you we have a lot of traffic. We have tens of thousands of cars go through there every day. But I have to say that we have really embraced the slower traffic, and it still flows very well, and you can get through, and there's a little bit of backup, as Joe said. It's not substantial, and it's not problematic. But we actually, as a downtown, consider that a good thing, because now people are going a little bit slower. It's better for the pedestrians, and the people driving are actually looking in the windows and seeing the stores and recognizing what's going on, and it actually increases the value of the retail. So it's actually been, it's a fundamentally good thing for slower traffic in the downtown for both pedestrians and the retail. I think that that's a great example, and there are hundreds of others as well.
Joe, this question is for you. And first, I want to thank you for pointing out the obviousness that we should be aware of about the fact that our tax code is driving some of, what's happening in our communities. That being said, if I were someone who had read the tax code and kind of understood the point that you're making explicitly, do you have any suggestions about strategy in terms of transitioning that tax code into a better format?
Yeah, actually, it depends on the place. Like for you all, you all operate a lot like New York State, where every township has its own assessor, and then you have a county assessor. That's redundant. It's kind of silly, actually, because then you're just encouraged to play games where towns come up with their own little taxation system, their own little monetary system, and the county has to pay somebody to come up with like the European Monetary Fund to kind of figure out what Europe's what Italy's dollar is versus the pound in England. So you can get rid of a layer of bureaucracy and just reprogram the person, put them in the finance department or something. Don't start firing people, but it creates unnecessary bureaucracy. Canada actually has this law where you can't create a new law until you get rid of one. So they make you sacrifice something before you create a new policy, which that heritage of your tax assessment process actually dates back to the 1700s, and it's just something that people have always done. You see it more in the old states than down south. I just have one assessor in North Carolina, and somehow we haven't fallen apart. In states where you have impact fees, you can make up that gap if you don't have land value taxation, so you can start to solve the problem where you can say, okay, Mr. Developer, I understand that the cheaper the building, the lower the taxes, but guess what? This is what it costs us to maintain that frontage in front of your building. So even though you're paying this much taxes, we're going to charge you a maintenance account that's going to be up here. So you can continue to underbuild in our community. That's perfectly fine. But we're going to recoup our losses that you're giving us. California is talking about that. So, a lot of it really, you want to first do the CAT scan, see what your body is before you come up with your dietary plan and your exercise plan. It's just, I want to see what your blood rate is, what your body mass index, all of that, before I can prescribe, you need to run more. You might have bad knees. Maybe you should just get on a treadmill instead, Does that make sense? But there's lots of different options out there.
Got a question about TIF capture, like DDA or brownfield TIF. Does that ever factor into the quality of a high-density mixed-use development downtown? Do you do a plus or minus factor for that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, we see it a lot. And basically what TIF is just enabling you all to have a transparent conversation about the cash flow. You're already doing it. You've already got an agreement as a corporation and how your cash system works. That's already in the tax code. So what the TIF allows you to do is basically dial in and be specialized on an individual project. It's more controversial because it's more in the public sphere, where you all get to see exactly what he's doing as a commissioner with a developer in the public realm. But like I said, I can come in your zoning code, go to the big box area, zoning code of your town, build a big box and not pay for any of the infrastructure that you've put down. So that's a deal. That's, in my mind, that's a TIF because, literally I went to this is what a nerd I am. I actually went to Walmart's presentation at the assessors conference. And the head of Walmart real estate stood up there with all of the assessors in the entire country showing how cheap his buildings were. And he's like, look at how cheap our buildings are. And he started handing out cards. And he's like, I want you to call me because if you think we beat up Procter & Gamble about our tide, you got to see what we do to the general contractors about our building. We make the cheapest buildings possible. And so, I'm in the back of the room, my heart's collapsing. I'm like, oh my God, this is equal parts brilliant because in one meeting, this guy is driving down all of his tax bills across the country. But it's also, my heart's collapsing because he's basically yelling, I am building the lowest taxes in your community, or paying the lowest taxes. And great. So I rolled up after the presentation and asked him during Q&A, I said, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? He said, 15 years. We will be out of that building in 15 years. So what they've figured out is they can start the depreciation cycle again in 15 years. So they figured out the incentives built into our system. So again, people ask me, like, do you hate Walmart? I'm like, no, 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 no. I hate the game. Walmart's the player that's illuminating the game. So be aware of that. You know, pay attention to the TIF. There's good TIF and bad TIF. I've seen plenty of bad TIFs. I've seen plenty of good TIFs. Not all TIFs are created equal, but at least it's a conscious engagement in the process. And you all are shareholders in this corporation where there's already deals going on. So look at TIFs, be critical of TIFs, but also dig deeper into the whole system. Because TIFs are just a quick ability to kind of solve small problems.
All
And
right.
it keeps the last thing I would say is it keeps the money focused, which I think is the other thing, versus the idea of spreading money around. Keeping it focused, I think, is a big part of that, focus on development and value. And I think that's part of what a TIF can do as well.
Well, let's thank everybody for showing up here tonight and give these guys a hand for